Justin Jefferson signs a $140 million deal with $35 million guaranteed, or $110 million guaranteed, $35 million a year. I mean, the reaction is nice for you, Justin. I hope you have a great life. Hopefully the fam's doing well. Hopefully mom enjoys her new house, so on and so forth. What it does for the Pittsburgh Steelers is pretty spot on and pretty something we've been talking about to this point, and kind of just ends the conversation. I think that's all it does. I think for the last time, we'll be able to sit here and say Brandon Aiyuk is a name to talk about with the Steelers, which I'm very thankful for, because I don't know about you, I'm getting a little bit tired of talking about Brandon Aiyuk and the Pittsburgh Steelers. Brandon Aiyuk's going to look for $30+ million, especially after the Justin Jefferson deal. Anybody who didn't sign their wide receiver to an extension prior to this is in a lot of trouble, and they are certainly looking at this as we messed up a little bit. Shout out to the Philadelphia Eagles for inking Devontae Smith to a deal beforehand. I mean, the Miami Dolphins inking Jalen Waddle beforehand. You look at the teams that are left, the Cincinnati Bengals, San Francisco 49ers, they're in trouble. They're looking at $30+ million, and the Steelers are now out of the conversation for literally anybody in that price tag. Because prior to this, it was, maybe you could get Brandon Aiyuk and you could convince him for $25 million, and that makes some sense as long as you don't give up more than a first-round draft pick or so on and so forth. Today, it's you're going to probably give up a first-round draft pick and then $32, $33 million a year, and that's never going to happen. I do have a name. I want to hear your thoughts on my crazy for thinking Brandon Aiyuk's ship has officially sailed, probably crashed and burned at some point, and the Pittsburgh Steelers can't even see it anymore.
No, I'm in agreement with this one. I mean, you always expected to have to pay Brandon Aiyuk a pretty hefty price, and I don't think that the wide receiver market is going to continue to be set differently based on this Justin Jefferson one. I don't think anybody's going to get paid more than Justin Jefferson, because I think most people in the NFL understand that he is, above and beyond the number one receiver in the National Football League at this current moment, but it doesn't mean the prices aren't going to go up because of it. So I don't think it's going to be Brandon Aiyuk's setting the wide receiver market. I don't think he's going to surpass that. But I think at the same time, especially when you look at the Steelers situation, where with the wide receiver market going the way that it is, you would imagine they're going to have to pay George Pickens over $20 million on his next contract, just simply because of where it's at now and where it's going to be in the next couple of years. You're not going to be able to bring in a guy like that and pay him that much money and then be able to afford a George Pickens. And I really think the Steelers are keen on keeping George Pickens as their number one option for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, there's too many guys. There's too many names. And I mean, we said it yesterday when we got off the podcast and we realized that it happened. In Minnesota, it makes sense. You know what I mean? You pay Justin Jefferson quarterback money because you have a rookie quarterback. The Pittsburgh Steelers are probably going to have to pay one of their quarterbacks at some point. And even if it's $25 million a year or $30 million a year and nobody's breaking the bank, you're not paying two wide receivers, TJ Watt, and the most expensive defense in football, and making that work. It's just not going to work. You got to keep your options realistic. And I'm sorry, but a wide receiver worth $30 million, in my opinion, isn't even worth it in the first place. Justin Jefferson might be the only one. Tyreek Hill might be behind him. But besides those two, I guess maybe Jamar Chase, but I still think that's teetering the line there. I think besides Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson, there's not a wide receiver in football who makes that impact with anybody on the field who really changes your offense the way those two do. I just don't see anybody else. And Brandon Aiyuk, I'm sorry. Brandon Ayuk's a really good wide receiver, a superstar wide receiver. You want to pay him $25 million. I think he's a phenomenal number one. I think he's looking for more money than he's worth. And the Pittsburgh Steelers are no chance they are going to pay more money than he is worth. That being said, I think it narrows it to one option. You could talk about John Mechie, but there's been no traction with John Mechie. You could talk about DK Metcalf. I've been told that those rumors are not true, that the DK Metcalf, the Pittsburgh Steelers called. I got laughed at. My source laughed on the phone to me and said, "Do you believe him?" And I said, I didn't believe him, but I have to. This is my job to make sure that what I don't believe is real. DK Metcalf is not coming to Pittsburgh. And if he does, look it. I mean, sometimes I'm wrong. I get it, but I would say right now, anybody who's holding on to that hope, let it go. Let it go. There is one name, and he's not an exciting name, but he's a realistic name, and I think he's a name that makes a ton of sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's Courtland Sutton. If you want to pay $15-16 million a year, which is what he's asking for 2 years, that is a steal right now for a wide receiver too, and he makes way too much sense. That's where the Steelers are. They have one option. Let me ask you this. We've talked about Courtland Sutton way too many times. There's no conversation left to have. So where the Steelers sit currently, are you opposed to trading for Courtland Sutton and settling for a, hey, that's okay, this is all right, this is where we are? Or would you rather give the guys on the roster more of an opportunity to kind of grow and see what you have there?
If the Steelers weren't in a win now mode, I would say give these young guys a shot, because you're still going to have the young guys getting an opportunity, right? You're still going to have Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson are still going to be part of this offense. The only people you're really taking out of it, if you bring in a Courtland Sutton, or well, that's less for Van Jefferson, that's less for Quez Watkins, that's less for Cordero Patterson in the long run. Who cares? You're trying to win a Super Bowl right now. And if you bring in Courtland Sutton, right now the Steelers have $18 million in cap space this season. If you bring in Courtland Sutton, you're bringing in a bona fide number 2, and he is exactly that, a number 2. You're replacing, Deontay Johnson's cap hit with Courtland Sutton, and you're bringing in a guy that's going to be able to complete your offense. So I'm not against it at all. And honestly, I think it's their best option as of right now. And I don't think it's a settle at this point at all, because I really think that when you see Brandon Ayuk potentially going for $30+ million, that just takes it out of the realm of possibility. So I don't think it's settling. I think it's their best option.
Yeah, I agree. And I there's 2 comments here that I think are perfect. Okay. First off, the second one's a joke and it's hilarious. So I want to highlight that one. The first one, the Steelers have 12 wide receivers on the roster. Why are they still looking for a number 2? And I think that's because they have 12 wide receivers on the roster. If the Steelers had 8 wide receivers on the roster or 9 wide receivers on the roster, and you were like, all right, cool, guys are competing for that 4th or 5th roster spot, makes a lot of sense. But the Pittsburgh Steelers are bringing in wide receiver after wide receiver after wide receiver after wide receiver because they are fully invested in finding somebody that works, because they don't have that option, and they're pretty convinced and sure that they don't have that option. So they're just trying to find anybody who's out there who could work. That's why you have 12 wide receivers on the roster. It's different than, a couple of years ago you were talking about, and it could go to the roster cuts. A couple of years ago you're talking about, are you going to keep 6 or 7 wide receivers because the wide receiver room's that good? This year it's, you have 12 wide receivers. You're probably going to keep 4 running backs because there's no need to keep 7 wide receivers. Really, you might not even keep 6 wide receivers if you have positions of need elsewhere, like tight end where you could keep a Rodney Williams, or corner where you could keep a whoever. That's where you're looking. The Steelers have an abundance of options because they don't have a good one. And that's why they're continuing to add to the group, because they're not looking to make anybody a bona fide number 2. They're just looking to find a number 2. They're looking to find anybody. And you could talk about Roman Wilson, but Roman Wilson hasn't proven or shown that he's a number 2 yet. And quite frankly, he looks more like a 3rd round draft pick who's a rookie than he does a potential superstar right out of the gates. And I don't think that's a knock on Roman Wilson. I think he's a 3rd round rookie who just stepped into a new organization and has to learn the NFL. That's pretty normal. That's what happens. And then this might be the best comp we've had in weeks. Maybe Courtland Sutton don't want to be Mr. Unlimited. Don't want to be unlimited. That was incredible. Shout out EJ. Shout out EJ. I think Courtland Sutton's the only name that makes sense right now. You could go into the wide receiver market in free agency and talk about Corey Davis, just so on and so forth. If we're talking, this makes sense, this is where the Steelers are going, insiders around the Pittsburgh Steelers, the conversation is expect a trade, and expect it between June and training camp, because the Steelers, they're not going to wait.